All right, guys, what's the best way to lift your Jeep, re-gear your Jeep, and add true ground clearance all at the same time? With a portal. What is a portal? Well, we're here today at 74 Welds to talk to the guys and have them explain exactly what that is and get a sneak peek at something cool that's coming out for the Ford Bronco. So let's go check it out. Hey everybody, it's Weld with X's 4x4 and we build badass 4x4s. Well, for the last couple of years, there's been a lot of talk around the off-road world about portals. Mostly because guys like Lauren Healy and Vaughan Jr. put them on their Broncos. They've been running the Ultra 4 series, and that's brought a lot more attention to them than they used to get. They're nothing new. They've been around for a while, but a company called 74 Weld started building them for those guys to run on the Ultra 4 cars, and ever since then, a lot of people have been talking about them. Well, it just so happened that my buddy Tony from Trail Cartel, you've seen him on our YouTube videos and some other stuff, he has his own YouTube channel. Well, he decided he was going to buy Casey Curry's Gladiator. And he asked me if I would be, willing to go out there and help him bring it back. What's wrong?
Hell no!
Yeah, of course I was going to do that. It opened up an opportunity for us to swing down from Corona down to El Cajon, California. It's only a couple hours out of the way. And we figured it was worth a shot, go down there and talk to these guys. So I hit up Quinn, and he said, yeah, come on down, let's talk. It'll be great.
Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs.
So we picked up Casey's Gladiator, we drove down there and walked in the door, and we fully prepared to go in and make a great video where we talk to those guys and do some Q&A with them to really help us explain to you guys what portals do and how they benefit you. But they love to talk. They're very passionate about what they do. They're very intelligent. They're very smart. They're very knowledgeable. And as soon as we walked in the door, they just started telling us all kinds of stuff.
Basically, when Lauren and Vaughn break stuff,
you get the pieces.
I get the pieces so that I can then analyze them. So here's what we're seeing.
So the cameras were rolling, and we didn't want to stop them because it was so good. But it made for a terrible video. I'm going to have to come back in here and kind of narrate you guys through it, which is not bad. It's kind of fun. You guys get to see the cool stuff in the shop behind me too. So where do we start? Let's start with what is a portal axle. Well, it's sort of an extension to the axle that's already there, but not really. Basically, what they're going to do is, let's just say in Jeep terms, we're going to replace the steering knuckle on the front of the vehicle, right? If you look at your steering knuckle that's on there now, it's attached between the two upper and lower ball joints. The axle shaft goes straight into a unit bearing or wheel bearing that's mounted to the steering knuckle, and it's going to drive the wheel. Well, what the portal axle does is actually does kind of the same thing, but now we're going to replace that steering knuckle with a new billet steering knuckle that they built, machined, everything right there at 74 Weld. The axle shaft's going to go into that steering knuckle, and then it's going to go through some more gear reduction, and then it'll have a final drive that's even lower than where your stock one is now. How low? About 3.8 inches. I'll go back to that in a minute, but we're going to go through that gear reduction, output out, and basically you're going to have something like the unit bearing there, but it's not a unit bearing. It's going to have a flange, you're going to have your wheel studs on it, you're going to bolt up, almost like you'd never know it was there. What does it benefit you? We're going to gain three things by doing this. You're going to gain 3.8 inches of lift. Not lift in the traditional sense that you guys are used to, where we go in and we change out the springs and the control arms, new shocks, and you get new drive shafts. We're going to go through a lot of things to make that basically 4 inches of lift work on your Jeep. It's always going to change things, right? Now your steering geometry has changed. The control arm geometry has changed. Sometimes you go with a 4-inch, you need to go with a long arm suspension, and all this stuff to make the ride quality just like it was when you first purchased the Jeep. A lot of things happen when you go to 4 inches. And why are we going to 4 inches? Well, we're going there because we want to run larger tires. If you're running larger tires, you're going to drain some energy or power from that vehicle's engine. So you're going to have to re-gear too. Even though the price tag seems high, I think it's still going to be cost effective. First, we're going to gain 3.8 inches of lift, and we're never going to touch the suspension. You're still going to have the same OEM ride quality you had the day you drove it off the lot. And believe me, with some of these Jeeps out here, like this blue one behind me, the factory 392, it's got a great suspension. I mean, and I'm a guy that makes a living building these Jeeps from scratch. The factory Jeep has a great power, it has a great suspension to go along with it. So why do we want to mess with that when we could just put portal axles on there? We're going to gain 3.8 inches of lift, and we're going to go through some gear reduction, 1.22 to be exact, that's going to correct some of that. We're putting larger tires on there. Now all of a sudden we don't really need to re-gear, because as we go through that final drive that's in the portal, well, we're gaining a lot of that power back. Finally, and this is my favorite, you're going to gain 3.8 inches of real, true ground clearance below the diff. This is going to make those things a rock crawling god. We can do everything. We could put 4 inches of lift. We can put 6 inches of lift. We could put 40-inch tires. We could put 42s, 43s, whatever. But we're never really gaining that much lift underneath the diff. And that thing's still going to be going out. Even after you put all that lift on there and those tires, you're going to go out, you're still going to be smacking them around on the rocks. By putting the portal axles on there, we're lifting the Jeep up enough to clear 40-inch tires. We're gaining that big ground clearance underneath, and we're getting that gear reduction. So really, we don't really change anything other than the portals, and we gain all that great off-road capability. To me, that's where the portals come in. Now, is a portal axle as strong as a Dana 60?
No clearance issues on full.
No, because that's the biggest thing that like people kind of struggle with is what'd you do with the suspension? I did nothing to it. So like I had a guy email me today and he's asking about compatibility of a JT. He said he bought him a hobby and he wants to run 39s. And I go, just bolt the portal on, that's it. And he goes, well, but what else do I need to do? And I say, I'm encouraging you to do absolutely nothing. Now, then I get the question a lot is, well, what do you think of stock housings with portals in 39s or 40s? And I go, remove the portal from the equation. What do you think about stock housings in 40s? I have friends that run stock axles in 40s for 2 years and have not had a single problem. I also have friends who would go out and break that setup in 1 day.
Yeah.
How do you drive?
In my opinion, that's all going to come down to the end user. I've seen guys blow up axles with V6s. And then I've seen guys that have put Hemis in on stock axles. They put 40s on them, and they're still running strong today. They go off-roading with them. It all comes down to the way you guys use it. So I don't think there's ever a definitive answer out there to bulletproof an off-road vehicle without spending a ton of money. But in this case, you're almost going to spend the same amount of money on the portals as you would, maybe even less, putting 60s and a big lift and all that stuff just to run 40-inch tires, 38-inch tires, dependably off-road. So I think the portals are a big advantage to off-roading, and I think it's something you guys are really going to enjoy. I'm going to try and get my hands on some soon so that we can really do some product testing out in the field. Now, you Jeep guys aren't the only guys that are going to benefit from this. It turns out that they're also developing portal axles for the Broncos too. So we should see something coming out for the Broncos in the near future that is going to allow us to also get those guys off-road. The advantages aren't exactly the same, and there may be some options down the road, a couple of different options for the Bronco guys down the road, namely because of the IFS suspension. We don't always want 4 inches of lift. Maybe we just want a couple inches, but we want to correct our CV angle by a couple inches too, because as we start to improve things, we're going to notice that some things are going to get weaker, or we're going to find weak points down the road. CV axles are a big thing. So as we droop out that suspension and we get a lot of angle on those CV axles, we're going to start breaking CV axles. So hopefully that we can get those, maybe get some portal axles with a little bit of correction to that CV angle so we can get lots of droop without putting a lot of bind in there. And finally, while we're there at 74 Weld, we heard a rumor that they were developing a new steering rack for the Bronco.
You want to pull up
The rack?
Yeah.
That's a big thing that I've been waiting for, because ever since those things came out, what do people always do? They threw big tires on them and took them off-road. We do that with everything. We've done it with Jeeps, Wranglers, and Gladiators, and now they're doing it with the Broncos. Well, they found out really quickly that the steering rack was the weak link. Whether it was the tie rods or the housing for the steering rack breaking completely, the pinion shaft in there, whatever it was, they were breaking these things. So the guys at 74 Weld on the down low have been developing a new all aluminum housing, nice 6061 aluminum housing. The advantages are this. Quinn thinks that the steering rack that comes in the Bronco now, obviously it's cast. He thinks it's like A356 aluminum, which is pretty common. The problem is that it's not very ductile. Brittle.
The technical term is inelastic, so it can't actually bend. So it just cracks.
Yeah.
Which, lo and behold, I mean, that's what we're seeing. It just fractures, right?
Yeah.
And a fracture starts to propagate, and then it just runs all the way around, and the part breaks off. What we care about on this is tensile, yield, and elasticity a lot, especially on something that's going to be shock loaded. So elasticity on 6061 aluminum is 17%. So it has a lot of bend in it before it actually fails.
For lack of a better word, it's brittle.
Inelastic.
So anytime you put any strain on that housing, normally the strain is going to come when we start drooping out. Again, those CV angles, well, you're going to get a lot of angle on your tie rods too. And the vectors applying to the forces applying to that rack coming in, well, it can't really handle it. So it starts to break, it starts to crack. Once it cracks, well, it's over with, right? I think he said the A356 aluminum has a ductile strength of flexibility of like 3%, whereas 6061 is more like 17%. So we can put that same rack in there, start flexing out, getting crazy off-road, and it's not going to fracture and break like the stock one does. It doesn't mean that the stock one's bad necessarily. It's probably good for most people that are buying these things and never taking them off-road. But for guys like me that want to really push this thing to its limits and see its capabilities, we're going to need a strong steering rack, and that's where I think the guys at 74 Weld are going to come in. Time will tell. Hopefully we'll get our hands on one soon. We can throw it in there and start off-roading with it. They broke down a lot of the problems that they see with the stock steering rack. Right now, they're very early in the development of this thing, and their plan is to use Haas 3.0 parts internally. So, as we know, there's a lot of electronics on these new Broncos and Jeeps and everything else, but in this case, we're just talking about Bronco. But the steering rack is no exception. I think it's a good plan. I think it's going to work, but time will tell. No matter what happens, what I think for sure is that 74 Weld guys are really trying hard to build some really awesome products. The innovation that's taking place in there is crazy. They really have a really talented team in there working out all kinds of stuff. I mean, stuff that I couldn't even show you guys that isn't even off-road related. They have a depth of talent there. I think they're building some cool stuff, and I'm really looking forward to what they come out with in the future. I mean, yeah, I say this stuff is expensive. They're even trying to figure out how to make it cheaper by going with ductile iron that they can just cast and machine out real quick versus aluminum stuff, because that'll make it a little bit cheaper for some people that don't want the, the all aluminum fancy machine stuff. So keep an eye on them. We're definitely keeping an eye on them, and we're looking forward to what comes out in the future. Oh, and by the way, that Curry JT that we talked about in the beginning, make sure you keep an eye on our YouTube channel because we'll be coming out with a walk around video of that soon. So click right here for more off-roading videos and other cool stuff.